America stands at a financial crossroads. Once celebrated as the wealthiest nation in human history, it now teeters on the edge of bankruptcy. The question haunting economists and citizens alike is, how did the richest country in the world end up unable to pay even the interest on its own debt? To uncover this, we must look back through decades of political decisions, hidden financial maneuvers, and economic turning points that reshaped the very foundation of American prosperity. Imagine taking out 10 mortgages on your home, only to realize your income from a minimum wage job could never cover the payments. That's where America stands today, living beyond its means, trapped by compounding debt. The United States owes over $1 trillion in annual interest, with obligations to Social Security, Medicare, and student loans stacking higher than the national debt itself. When officials claim the debt is $33 trillion, they're not counting the true burden. Some experts estimate it's closer to $260 trillion when all liabilities are included. To understand how we arrived here, we need to rewind to the mid-20th century. After World War II, the United States emerged as the richest nation on Earth. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement made the US dollar the world's reserve currency, backed by gold. Foreign nations trusted American paper money because it could be redeemed for real gold held in US vaults. Banks from Peru to France stocked dollars in their reserves, believing the United States would remain honest with its currency. But by the late 1960s, the cracks began to show. The government printed more dollars than it had gold to back, financing wars, welfare, and political promises. Then in 1971, President Richard Nixon made a fateful decision. He severed the dollar's link to gold entirely. Overnight, the US dollar transformed from a note of value to a note of debt. From that moment on, America's money was no longer tied to anything tangible. It became a system of faith, controlled by the Federal Reserve, a central bank that critics argue acts less like a guardian of the economy and more like an engine of inflation. But this was only the latest chapter in a story that began decades earlier. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt had already forced Americans to turn in their gold under threat of imprisonment, replacing real wealth with paper promises. Once all private gold was seized, the government raised its official value from $20 to $35 per ounce, effectively robbing citizens of nearly half their purchasing power overnight. It was one of the largest financial sleights of hand in history, and it set a dangerous precedent. When times get tough, the government can simply rewrite the rules of money. By the 1960s, the last remnants of sound currency began to vanish. Silver coins were replaced with copper, marking the quiet end of real money in circulation. It was a lesson few understood because, as the older generation observed, schools no longer taught what money truly is or where value comes from. Instead, students were told to get good grades, work hard, and trust the system, a system now built entirely on debt. The Federal Reserve, established in 1913, became the architect of this new monetary order. Critics describe it as a Marxist institution in disguise, a central bank created not by the people, but by elite economists and politicians operating outside the direct control of voters. Its leaders, often academics and former professors, wield immense power over the economy through interest rates and money printing. And today, as the debt spirals beyond comprehension, the Fed faces an impossible choice: raise rates and risk collapse, or print more money and destroy the dollar's value altogether. Younger generations, burdened by student debt and rising costs, have little idea how America got here. They live in a world where inflation quietly erodes their savings, where wages stagnate while prices soar, and where government lies have become routine. From the Gulf of Tonkin to weapons of mass destruction, from stimulus checks to endless wars, deception has become part of the national fabric. The trust once held in Washington has been replaced with doubt, and for good reason. America's downfall didn't happen overnight. It unfolded slowly, like a shadow stretching across generations. Each era made a compromise, spending more, borrowing more, and asking the next generation to pay the price. And now, that bill has come due. By the mid-1970s, Warnings of national insolvency echoed across Capitol Hill. In 1976, the US debt approached $1 trillion, a figure that terrified economists of the time. They feared that surpassing that milestone would bring ruin. Yet decades later, that once unthinkable sum now seems trivial, dwarfed by the $33 trillion mountain that looms today. What took America 200 years to borrow, it can now add in a mere 3 months. The cycle repeats. Each administration spends more than the last. Each crisis justifies another bailout, and the money printer roars back to life. In the process, the US dollar, the same currency that once symbolized stability, has been quietly devalued. It buys less, saves less, and means less than it did before. To the untrained eye, the problem seems invisible. Politicians assure the public that debt doesn't matter, that printing money can fix anything. But deep down, the numbers don't lie. When interest payments alone exceed the government's revenue, the system begins to eat itself. America has reached that point. The Treasury can't collect enough taxes to cover even the basics, and the Fed can't print fast enough without destroying confidence in the dollar. The result is inflation, an invisible tax that punishes the middle class and the poor. It drives the cost of living higher while wages lag behind. Savings vanish, retirements collapse, and the dream of upward mobility fades into memory. The very people who played by the rules, working hard, going to school, saving for the future, are finding the rules themselves were rigged from the start. Meanwhile, the establishment shrugs. Financial institutions profit off volatility, the media distracts with culture wars, and universities churn out graduates who understand ideology better than economics. The education system has replaced financial literacy with blind trust in authority. Few realize that money itself, those green paper bills, has no intrinsic value. It's only as strong as the faith people have in it. And faith, once lost, is nearly impossible to restore. In 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, he set off a chain reaction that still reverberates today. The dollar became the world's problem, not just America's. Every central bank holding US debt became tied to a currency that could be printed infinitely. For a while, it seemed to work. The illusion of prosperity was maintained through credit cards, mortgages, and low-interest loans. But the truth was simple. The wealth wasn't real. It was borrowed. Decade after decade, the illusion grew until it became unsustainable. The Federal Reserve lowered rates to zero, corporations bought back their own stocks, and the government promised entitlements it could never afford. Even now, as debt ratings are downgraded by agencies like Moody's and Fitch, few Americans understand what that means. They see headlines, but not consequences. They don't see the warning lights flashing red across every economic dashboard, and as the nation drowns in debt, the same advice is repeated. Go to college, get a good job, invest in a 401k, and trust the system. But what happens when that system is the very thing collapsing? What happens when the institutions meant to protect the people are the ones profiting from their downfall? By the 1980s, America had entered a new era of credit and consumption. Plastic cards replaced cash, and the idea of buy now, pay later became a lifestyle. Ronald Reagan promised prosperity through trickle-down economics, arguing that cutting taxes on the wealthy would benefit everyone. But instead of trickling down, the wealth stayed at the top. The gap between the rich and the working class widened, and the nation grew increasingly dependent on borrowed money to sustain its illusion of success. The 1990s brought a false sense of stability. The tech boom created millions of new jobs, and a generation of investors who believed the stock market would never fail. But beneath the excitement, America's industrial heartland was hollowing out. Factories closed, jobs moved overseas, and entire towns faded into poverty. The US traded manufacturing for speculation, real value for virtual gains. The new economy wasn't built on production, but on promises. Then came the 2008 financial crisis, a collapse born from greed and ignorance. Banks gambled with derivatives and subprime mortgages, creating bubbles that inevitably burst. Millions lost their homes, savings, and jobs. Yet rather than punishing those responsible, the government bailed them out. The same institutions that caused the disaster were deemed too big to fail. The cost was passed to taxpayers, while Wall Street received its lifeline. The message was clear. Profit was private, but loss was public. From that moment on, Americans realized that fairness had vanished from the financial system. Those who broke the Econatan, OMI, were rewarded. Those who played by the rules were ruined. The Fed once again printed trillions, inflating asset prices while wages stagnated. For the rich, it was the greatest transfer of wealth in modern history. For the rest, it was the slow erosion of hope. In the 2020s, the pattern continued. Pandemic lockdowns shut down small businesses, while giant corporations grew even stronger. Trillions were printed under the guise of relief, but much of it flowed to the top. Stimulus checks offered momentary comfort, but inflation soon devoured their value. Rent, food, and fuel prices soared, squeezing ordinary Americans harder than ever before. Now, as 2025 unfolds, the cracks in the facade are too large to ignore. The national debt has become a ticking time bomb, and the Federal Reserve's tools no longer work. Each attempt to fix the problem only deepens it. Interest rates rise, but inflation refuses to yield. The economy is slowing, layoffs are spreading, and faith in the system is evaporating. Behind the scenes, quiet preparations are underway. Nations around the world are shifting away from the dollar, building trade systems that no longer depend on it. China, Russia, and even US allies explore alternatives to the petrodollar. If the world stops needing American currency, the empire's foundation crumbles. The consequences could be catastrophic: hyperinflation, social unrest, and the collapse of global confidence in what was once the world's safest asset. And yet, few talk about it. The media spins distractions, politicians argue over trivialities, and most citizens remain too busy surviving to see what's coming. But beneath the noise, one truth echoes louder every day. Debt always demands repayment, and the bill for a century of excess is about to arrive. As the clock ticks toward the inevitable reckoning, America stands at a crossroads, a nation caught between denial and reality. The signs are everywhere: empty storefronts, rising crime, record homelessness, and a generation buried in debt before their lives have even begun. The promise of endless growth has turned into a haunting silence of uncertainty. The same streets that once echoed with ambition now whisper of exhaustion. The government continues to promise stability, but the truth is harder to hide. The dollar's dominance is slipping, foreign investors are pulling back, and inflation is eating away at the middle class like an invisible fire. The illusion of control fades with every new crisis. The system built to protect prosperity now feeds on it. Yet, amid the uncertainty, something deeper stirs: awareness. More Americans are questioning how the game was played and who really benefited. Ordinary people are learning that the cycle of debt, inflation, and dependence wasn't an accident. It was a design that enriched the few and trapped the many. But history has always shown that when old systems collapse, new ones rise. Every empire that overreached met its moment of truth, and every generation found a way to rebuild. The same will be true here. Whether through reform, resistance, or rebirth, America's next chapter will depend not on the few in power, but on the many who refuse to surrender to despair. This is not the end of the story. It's the turning point, where illusion meets consequence, and the people must decide what survives. The era of easy money and endless debt is closing. What comes next will redefine not just the economy, but the very idea of the American dream itself.